Undead Unluck is an anime that currently consists of a single two-core season that started in fall of 2023 and finished up in winter of 2024. It's made by TMS, which may not ring any bells, but they're responsible for venerable series like Lupin the Third and Detective Conan, in addition to newer shows like Dr. Stone and Rent a Girlfriend. The manga it's based on, written and illustrated by Yoshifumi Tozuka, is well regarded amongst its Shonen Jump contemporaries and represents a great example of the wonderful stories lurking just under the churning surface of the likes of One Piece, Jujutsu Kaisen, and My Hero Academia that dominate most shonen discussion. It follows Fuko Itsumo, who suffers from unluck that sees anyone who touches her suffer ignominious fates that increase in severity based on the emotional weight of the contact. After losing her parents to this quirk, she decides to live in solitude to protect herself and the world. One day, she tries to take her own life in despair, but meets a mysterious stranger that, like her, has a quirk. No matter the damage, he cannot die. The two of them quickly get wrapped up with Union, an organization that polices and neutralizes people with quirks, otherwise known as negators. On its face, Undead Unluck appears to be another in the long line of shonen staples, a story about people with special powers fighting each other over a series of plot contrivances. Unlike most of its peers, however, the underlying message is not one of power fantasies or the power of friendship, but rather an examination of the value of living and what we make of the circumstances life throws at us. It does this through the lens of familiar Monster of the Week storylines at first, as it eases you into the world and the goings-on with its characters. However, the show slowly peels away layers that reveal a much larger narrative underneath. By the end of Season 1, the fate of the world and all of existence are hanging in the balance, but it never feels like it had to rush to get there. More importantly, while the stakes are as high as possible, the narrative is less concerned with the fate of the universe than it is with the fate of its two leads. Fuko and the mystery man she names Andy are the heart and soul of the show, and regardless of where the overhanging plot leads, they never stop being the center of the viewer's attention. In spite of its genre and the stereotypes that brings, every arc focuses not on the climactic battle or whose superpowers are stronger, but instead on the relationships of the people involved. Negators are generally not happy people, and their abilities, while powerful, often see them posing a danger to normal people, either intentionally or no. Each has a troubled history with their quirks, and that pain and isolation helps unite them and drive them to conflict in equal parts. Each chapter of the story serves to highlight another type of relationship and another type of coping mechanism to deal with the isolation of being different. More importantly, as they examine these relationships up close, Fuko and Andy find in each other a camaraderie and slowly blossoming love. But the writing isn't perfect, and suffers occasional lapses in pacing. Some of the revelations in the latter half of the season seem to come out of nowhere, but this is also in part due to the huge cast of characters. In addition to the dozen members of Union, there are also a dozen or more side and tertiary characters that are introduced, and as a result, not all of them get the screen time they need to be fully developed. This means that while the show maintains its focus on Fuko and Andy as it should, many of the characters introduced by the midpoint are cast aside by the end. This isn't necessarily a failing of the story since it's based on an ongoing manga, but it does detract from the season as a whole when those characters aren't needed to tell the overarching plot of Season 1. Likewise, there are more than a few instances of what I call Dan Abnett syndrome, or more recently, Jujutsu Kaisen syndrome. That is, if a character is getting a full-on expositional flashback and backstory, it's likely because they're about to die. Anime is absolutely riddled with this narrative device, especially amongst its major players, but for some reason it's especially prevalent in shonen, and that's absolutely the case here. Used sparingly and written well, it can be an incredibly effective framing device and lend emotion to an otherwise underdeveloped character. But when it's overused, it begins to signpost itself, and you start to see the defeats and deaths coming a mile away. But ultimately, this is shonen, and whether the characters succeed is not in doubt, but rather how they overcome the current challenge. In spite of this, Undead Unluck maintains its focus on relationships and culminates on an emotion-filled final arc that finally brings the two leads together in a real and meaningful way. It is itself a 24-episode examination of the evolving and deepening relationship between Fuko and Andy, and by the end, I felt like they were finally ready to take on the astronomically high stakes that have been laid out before them. In my opinion, Fuko and Andy are one of the best couples in modern shonen, and unlike most of its peers, feels earned rather than thrust upon the characters for the sake of ticking a box. Ultimately, Undead Unluck came out of nowhere for me in a season full of shows I thought would eclipse it. But in the end, it's consistently been one of the shows that I find myself looking forward to each week. Its characters, rather than its story, make it greater than the sum of its parts, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I can say with confidence that I'm very much looking forward to another season of a shonen series. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you enjoyed this quick review. And as always, remember that your life has value, and that the world is a better place with you in it. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. And I'll see you next time.